All right, everyone. I guess we'll go ahead and get started. As people join in, I'll add them. But thank you for your attendance this evening. And we're studying the Psalms. We started doing it last quarter, and we did it for, I think it was 8 weeks that we did it. And so we're going to continue for another 8 weeks, more than likely, still studying the Psalms. Just as, if we can get back into the church building, then we'll have, uh, you know, different kinds of Bible class. You guys have seen where we'll go to the auditorium and we'll study stewardship like we did last night. Our normal weekly Bible study is on stewardship, and those are always on Wednesdays. And if we go back to services, that's what we'll be doing. But on the side, I think I'll probably still be doing this just because I have printed out, 8 weeks of this. So, and I think a survey of the Psalms is a really good class. So let's consider Psalm 16 this evening. If you want to, please bow with me as we begin the study. Father God, we are so thankful for the blessings that you've given us. We're so thankful for the opportunity that we have. We're able to study about your word, although through government mandates and through our own common sense, we're not permitted to be together in close quarters for long periods of time. And we ask, Lord, that you please help us to deal with that appropriately. But as well, we're so thankful that we have technology, modern technology, that allows us to stay connected and study your word, although it be different from what we're used to. We ask, Lord, that you please help us to use the tools that are available to us so that we may be effective Bible students. We ask, Lord, of our number who are sick and recovering, and we ask that you watch over them, and please help us to come out of this current tribulation, Lord, as children who have grown closer to you. Things we ask in your son's holy name. Amen. Okay. All right, let's begin Psalm chapter 16 this evening. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to read Psalm 16 in its entirety. So if you either pull out your material or if you go to Psalm 16, before I read it, you might notice the heading there. It says the Miktam of David. So if you have your material, I put it in the back pew last Sunday. If not, you'll probably see it on the heading of whatever translation you have. The word Miktam of David. Now, that's a word that we don't see in every single psalm. In fact, if you look at the bottom point of this PowerPoint, it says that appears in 6 different psalms. Psalm 16, the one we're studying tonight, as well as Psalm 56 through 60. The very first point there, pretty much, I'm not sure exactly what Miktam means. Some commentaries and scholars suggest that it has something to do with the something golden or secret, and so it kind of portrays this connotation of like you're something that to you that's precious and vulnerable. Maybe it's just your own mind, your heart, and something that people don't completely know except for God. So that's the idea of the word Miktam. Because if you look at Psalm 16 and Psalm 56 through 60, all of those psalms are really personal. They express, a certain kind of relationship with God, especially somebody who's trying to grow close to him or is grown close to him. So that's so the Miktam of David, this is David's inner thoughts. It's his vulnerability that's precious to him, but God is the one who is allowed in, and he's trying to grow closer to God in that regard. So that's the idea here. So before we begin reading here, before I begin going into the psalm, let's read it in its entirety. So it's just 11 verses. Verse 1. Preserve me, O God, for I take refuge in you. I said to the Lord, you are my Lord. I have no good beside you. As for the saints or the holy ones who are on the earth, they are majestic ones in whom is all my delight. The sorrows of those who have bartered or hastened for another God will be multiplied. I shall not pour out their drink offerings of blood, nor will I take the names upon their lips. The Lord is my portion of my inheritance and my cup. You support my lot. The lines have fallen to me in pleasant places. Indeed, my heritage is beautiful to me. I will bless the Lord who has counseled me. Indeed, my mind instructs me. Indeed, my mind instructs me in the night. I have set the Lord continually before me because he is at my right hand, and I will not be shaken. Therefore my heart is glad and my glory rejoices. My flesh also will dwell securely. For you will not abandon my soul in Sheol, nor will you allow your Holy One to undergo decay. You will make known to me the path of life. In your presence is fullness of joy. In your right hand there are pleasures forever. Okay, so short chapter there. We'll talk about, verses 9 through 11, and at the end of the psalm, which, by the way, if you didn't know this already, those are the verses that are mentioned again in the New Testament. So some of what this material wants us to do is make sure that we hit on those New Testament references, and it's more often than not that those New Testament references will point to Jesus. And so we'll get to that at the end of the chapter here. But looking at verses 1 through 4 to begin with, it talks about the Lord being his help. Now, if we're good Bible students, he says in verse 1, "Preserve me, O God." Why is that capitalized? You will recall from the last class, we looked at the word Adonai, A-D. That's the way it's abbreviated in our current vernacular. So it's 2021 A.D. in the year of the Lord. That's the word there. You're giving God his perfect title. So he says, "Preserve me, O God." So he puts his trust in God. And this is very common, right, in the Psalms. This is not an unusual topic for David to be talking about. He's putting his trust into God. I like what he says about his goodness is nothing without God. He has a deep relationship with God, understanding that he is flawed. We have to understand that we are flawed. And besides Jesus Christ, nobody has ever been good. Nobody has ever been perfect. And even the best human being beside him has been incredibly flawed. And David recognizes that about him. He says his goodness, he said, "I have no goodness beside you." So you got to recognize, because we call people good all the time. For us, that might be true, but in actuality, none of us are really good or righteous without God. So it says in Isaiah chapter 64. You don't have to turn there if you don't want to. It says in Isaiah 64, verse 6, the prophet says, "But we are all like an unclean thing, and all our righteousness are like filthy rags. We fade as a leaf, and our iniquities like the wind have taken us away." If there was any good that we've done, it hasn't been good enough to make us right. And so David recognizes that. David also recognizes the importance of unity, of other people who think like that. That's why guys, or adults, I'm sorry, and it's so difficult right now with the pandemic for a lot of us, because we don't feel the same unity that we felt on a week-to-week basis when we were able to go to worship services normally and hang out and talk for a bit. And then Wednesday night has been taken away, and I'm not commenting on that in a bad way. I'm just saying this is the reality. We have some of that unity that has been taken from us. Luckily, we have this technology, but David recognizes that, right? He mentions God's people. Hey, I like the fact that there are other people in verse 2 and verse 3 that are like me, that are trying to be righteous, or other translation would say holy ones. That's important. You go to those Psalms that are written there on the screen, and it talks about how David understood that, hey, even though we're not perfect people, it's still good to have others like us around. And what I like about it, how he ends this thought, if you look at what it says in verse 4, he talks about how some people look for another God. If you look for another God, you're going to have sorrows in life. And then he says at the end of verse 4, "I shall not pour out their drink offerings of blood, nor will I take their names upon my lips." So David here is talking, and put this in your mind. He has a good relationship with God in this psalm. He recognizes that others have good relationships with God, and he needs to put himself with those people and have unity. And now the comparison in verse 4 is, look, there are people out here that, for whatever reason, try to worship another God. And so David says, if you're trying to find another God that isn't the one true God, you're going to live a sorrowful life. And he says, I'm not going to be the type of person who pours a drink offering out to them. So what that meant is, There was commandments in the Old Testament to give drink offering to God, a libation to God. So you'd get this expensive drink and expensive perfume or something like that, and you would pour it out to God and you'd give it as a libation. Well, David said, I'm not going to do that with these other gods because I have no association with them. Furthermore, I'm not even going to say their names. Because of, we know everything that goes on in the world now. We know about all these other religions, right? Hinduism, Islam. David would be the kind of person who's like, I'm not even going to say, Allah or something like that. I'm not going to bring that up to my mouth. Now, I'm not sure it's sin to say those things. I don't think it is. But what he's saying here is I'm just not going to give it the importance that I give to God, obviously. I mean, it's not even something that's going to cross my mind, and therefore it's not going to cross my mouth. Look at what it says in Exodus chapter 23. Exodus 23, verse 13 says, and in all that I have said to you, be circumspect and make no mention of the name of other gods, nor let it be heard in your mouth. So this was a commandment from God to the Israelites. Make sure that you don't mention those other gods. And the idea there is like making sure that they don't hold a place in your heart like God does. So the reason I kind of spend some time on this point, you think about how modern day society is dealing with this issue, right? If you have a job in the corporate world or in some sort of teaching facility, something like that, you're expected to hold all religions in the same place, right? Now, we're supposed to live peaceably with all men. You should not be insulting people for the sake of it. But certainly, if you're in a conversation with somebody and they're saying, oh, the Jews worship the same God and Allah is basically the same God, and that's an opportunity for you to make sure that you're doing what is right and correct whatever is being said in that conversation. Because our society is going more and more towards, all religions are the same, really. No. David speaks some absolute truth here in saying if you follow any other god, your life will be filled with sorrows. And of course, if you make your own god out of yourself, well, then there's a lot of proverbs that talk about that. Anyways, moving further on to verses, let me pull it up here, verses 5 and 6. He talks about the Lord being his portion, how grateful he is for that. He talks about his inheritance, how the lines of his inheritance are falling pleasantly to him, and he's thankful for that. It's beautiful to him. And I think he's actually saying, I didn't just get lucky with whatever my inheritance is. And I don't know if he's being literal here. I think it's more metaphorically. But he's talking about, think about, if you ever received an inheritance of land, and you had 3 brothers or something like that. Well, if your portion, whatever, had the stream going through it and it had like all the lush fields or whatever, well, that's how David feels. I just got the best part of it. And he's not saying I got lucky, but I believe he points it back to God saying, I'm not just lucky, but I'm blessed. And so I know some people who are pretty well off. And what I like about them, the ones I respect actually, are the ones that say, I did get lucky, but I'm lucky because I got blessed. And so they're actually bringing it back to God. And that's what David's doing here. So verse 7 and 8, these are once again some pretty familiar thoughts to us as we've gone through the Psalms. He talks about God being his guide and strength. I will bless the Lord who has counseled me indeed. My mind instructs me in the night. I have set the Lord continually before me, because he is at my right hand. I will not be shaken. So you can see how this would have been the inner parts of David's mind, right? At night, I think about how I need to be entrusted to God and that he needs to be my strength. These are things he meditates at his most vulnerable places. And so you can kind of see that in David's mind, right? So won't talk about that too much. Some of the more familiar thoughts that we've already talked about in the Psalms. Let's move on to this last portion here, verses 9 through 11. Now, this is important because all of it's important, but this is important because we're now pointing to the New Testament. There's a back and forth of the Old Testament connecting with the New Testament. Talks about that he's joyful. So if you read verse 9 again, therefore my heart is glad, he's joyful, and my glory rejoices. My flesh will also dwell securely. So what is it that David is giving him this joy, where he feels this sense of security as well? Well, he talks about it continually. Verse 10, so this is the reason why, you will not abandon my soul in Sheol, nor will you allow your Holy One to undergo decay. So what is he talking about? I imagine if you were an Israelite in that time and you had read the psalm or you had sung the psalm that David is talking about, personally, I don't think you would have had a full understanding of what was being said. I think you might have had a glimpse. I think you might have had an idea, because there were some prophecies even early on, most famous, back to Genesis chapter 3. Israelite would have known that. But I'm not sure you would have grabbed the full picture. And I'm not sure David really understood what he was saying. But I also do think, to a certain extent, maybe he did know some. And he says, I'm joyful and I'm secure in God because he's not going to allow his Holy One to see corruption. Well, that verse is a verse that is quoted by Peter in the New Testament. You could turn to those verses right there in Acts chapter 2, where Peter stands on the day of Pentecost and he's preaching to the multitudes and he talks to them there. I am going to read just a very small portion of that. So Peter mentions some of the things in Psalm 16, and he says in verse 31, talking about it, and he looked ahead, talking about David. David looked ahead and spoke of the resurrection of Christ, that he was neither abandoned in Hades, nor did his flesh suffer decay. So here David is prophesying. He's a prophet talking about what was going to happen with Christ. But if you read it, this is the important part. David here sought or found rejoicing in that. He found security in that, knowing that Christ was going to raise from the dead. I'm not sure if he knew that in its completeness. I'm not sure he had the full picture like we did, but he felt some sense of security big enough for him to write about it and to find a rejoiceful notion in it. And that's what I really like about it. So there are other verses, we could talk to you about this in more like extent. That second point in the slide here, it says the resurrection of Christ is assurance of David's assurance and ours. It wasn't just David's, but it's ours too. So David found hope in that, but we can too. It gives us an anticipation of a very positive future. So you read verse 11. You can go back up there. Of Psalm 16, it says, you will make known my path of life. In your presence, my fullness is joy. In your presence is fullness of joy. And in your right hand, there are pleasures forever. So David talks about coming into God's presence, and he has this joy. He has this fullness of everything he needed. Maybe not everything he wanted, worldly speaking, but everything he needed. Take that back to the very first verse of the same psalm, Psalm 16. Remember what he asked God? He said, God, preserve me. And I believe at the end of the chapter, God did do that for him. Or at least he had a hope of that was going to happen, not only in his life, but also, it seems like, for all eternity. So I like Psalm 16 because it talks about David's inner thoughts. As I use this word a lot, but it's because sometimes it's hard for us to talk about these things. So David showed a certain degree of vulnerability, knowing that the things that he would be saying are somewhat private to him, somewhat private to us. But it's good for us to talk about these encouraging words to each other because it gives us, the hope like it gave David. It gives us a better understanding of how David knew something was going to happen in the future. And even as we got to see the full picture, it gives us an anticipation of an even better future. Home at last with Jesus, because if he was raised from the dead, we have promises that he will also take us with him when he comes again and ascends back into heaven with all the saints. And so there's just such a great story there in Psalm 16. Any questions or comments, guys? Probably not. I guess if there are no questions or comments, that means I did a pretty good job of explaining things. Thank you so much for your fine attention this evening. Lord willing, I'll see, if you're able to make it out to services, Lord willing, I'll see you all on Sunday. If not, we'll be here again on Thursday night. Regardless of the stewardship class, we'll still be here on Thursday night for the next study. All right. Thank you so much for your fine attention. Hope you'll have a good night, okay?